Okay, so we are live. Apologies that we've had to move on to a different link. So I'm just going to connect this now with
Live.
you all.
Apologies that we've had to move on to a.
So we're going to be looking at leadership styles and their situations, which is something that we're going to be covering in the Practice Managers Association. So we're just going to start off. Again, sorry that you were looking at a different link earlier on. We just had to move channels slightly. If you do want to chat to me throughout the live broadcast, you can chat in the group message at the side. If you are watching this pre-recorded, then feel free to message me or WhatsApp me throughout the weeks coming by as well. So the purpose of this session is to look at two different elements. We're going to be looking at leadership styles, and we're also going to be looking at organizational culture within your business. So let's crack on. First of all, when you look, and I've given you the workbooks already, when you look at leadership styles in an organization, there are many different ones, many different areas which we are going to cover throughout the session. We're also going to look at the strengths and weaknesses of each leadership style, and we're also going to look at maybe different situations in which you try and use that leadership style as well. Now, first of all, if you've already started your workbooks, and for those of you that aren't, feel free to message me, connect with me offline after this session. We're going to look at a couple of different standards. Now, first of all, when we look at leadership styles, the first one we're going to look at is autocratic. Now, the autocratic leadership style that I've mentioned down here is by Kurt Lewin. Now, autocratic is one of those styles of leadership where the role of the leader is someone who makes decisions by themselves. They are someone who is quite robust, can alter and move things around. They're someone who basically doesn't always take advice from the team. And a lot of people see that in a negative way. However, when you look at an autocratic leader, they are someone who is going to be able to react very quickly to threats, because they're the only ones that are making the key decisions. They don't have to ask the permissions of others. So you could see that there are definitely some key strengths and key weaknesses to people who are an autocratic leader. Now, alongside that, you have the complete opposite to an autocratic leader, and that is a democratic leader. So again, this is following the model by Kurt Lewin. A democratic leader is key because they're someone who listens to the team. You know, they take votes. Think of democratic like a democracy. A democratic leader will look at different viewpoints, look at different perspectives, see what's right, understand how they're going to develop and change that, and then they'll also take the best bits of the team ideas and put it into their own key development areas. So already you can see we've got two very different styles of leadership, autocratic and democratic. Now, in your practice, have a think about the style of leadership that you work in. Do you think at times your manager is more autocratic or democratic? Do they take on the decisions by themselves, or do they listen to the decisions of others? And also start to think which one is best in your situation. Now, there is another one on the Kurt Lewin model called laissez faire. This is someone who puts a lot of trust in the team, someone who gives the team more empowerment. They often take that step back and they let the team do the work, often putting in minimal effort. Now, some would say, okay, what's the role of the leader in that situation? However, we've got to understand in leadership and management, and when you lead people, that often you need this style of leadership. You need to be able to build really strong trust and transparency within your practice because you want the team to work with you. If you're too autocratic all the time, it shows that you don't put trust in the team. It shows that you're the type of person who is just going to go off and make their own decision. And although that's good at times, especially in an emergency situation, you do need that areas of democratic and laissez-faire. You need to be able to show empowerment, trust, and transparency. And have a think of that right now. Have a think of the situation that might have happened. What type of leadership were you? Think about maybe when you last had an emergency situation. I don't know, staff were off sick, or there was some conflict that you had to deal with in the team. Where did you sit in terms of that leadership style? Did you think it was right? And now that you're starting to learn a little bit more about leadership styles, do you think you could slightly change anything a little bit more? Now, there are many different styles of leadership and workbooks, and if you do some research online, you'll find many different models. In this session, we're going to be just be covering some of the main elements. Now, I've showed you quite a few on that Kurt Lewin model. However, if we look at another model now, we're going to look at some different styles of leadership, very similar in their descriptions. Now, on this one, the Bass model, we're going to look at transactional first. Very similar to autocratic, a transactional leader is someone who has key measurements. Yeah, they track the team and they track the team's performance to success. Now, what happens with this is they're able to really monitor and look at the team in a scientific way. Okay, it's I would say this style of leadership is actually a lot more management orientated as opposed to leadership. And when you look at a transactional leader and their characteristics, it's about that key performance indicator. It's about developing, tracking, being scientific in the approach, which is very different to the opposite to that, which is a transformational leader. Now, a transformational leader is someone who will direct the team. They will show the team that they can empower them through motivation, through coaching, through team development, through inspiration. You know, they're that inspirational visionary leader. So again, like the other model, the complete opposite, transactional versus transformational. And you might want to think where you would use these two different styles. You know, the situation in where you might use a more transformational style of leader is probably going to be in many different situations in the daily operation of the company. You might use it in your practice when you're looking after a younger apprenticeship who you're maybe training as a manager. You might be looking at this in a way when you're training and developing the staff on a regular basis. When you look at a transactional leader, you're going to be implementing this style more into a situation where you're maybe doing a supervision meeting, you know, when you're looking at the performance of the team member and making sure that they're sticking to the key targets in the operation. And it's important to understand when and where to use these two styles of leadership. So remember, transformational versus transactional. Now, in other models that I like to talk about, there's one other style that I love to talk about, and this is transcultural. Now, transcultural leadership is where you understand the power of different cultures and the way that different cultures might perceive things and how they're going to develop things. You know, when you think about it, different cultures solve problems differently. So, if you were to be a strong transcultural leader, then you're able to understand the mindsets of different people through different diversities, bring it into the place to create more inclusivity, and you're able to use the way people think differently to power more innovation and productivity and moving forward. Now, I want you to write down now a couple of case studies, and if you want to know more about them, I've got some PDF academic journals that I can send over to you. We've got a woman called Indra Neway. Now, she was once the CEO of Pepsi Cola. Now, she was a great transformational leader. She understood at the time Pepsi Cola wasn't going through a great situation, and she used her knowledge of different cultures and different mindsets to power the organization into a different field. Now, the other guy, Carlos Gulch, he was once the CEO of Renault Nissan. Now, in this particular one, he was able to look at the factories which they were using over in Japan, changing their culture and lifestyle. Now, okay, these are very different to working in a practice and working within the NHS. But I think what we need to be looking at through your leadership and management course with practice managers is we need to be looking at external things and seeing if we can use the knowledge from external managers and external organizations to bring into your practice. So that's some of the key things we're going to look at. I do think, you know, when I visit a lot of you already within your practices, that it's going to be good for you to implement some type of transcultural leadership, the diversity of working within the team, the power of understanding different minds and how to solve problems may work, especially in the future when maybe surgeries are merging together or whether there's a larger surgery being created. You need to have this strong leadership style to be able to develop that. Now, I've kind of throughout of those demonstrations spoken to you about some key areas in which you would use those situations. Have a think now. If I was to tell you a situation where there might be a change management happening, maybe your surgery is merging with another surgery, what type of leadership would you use? Okay, you could guess that you would use something which is transformational, and I would guess I would use something that's democratic. Because the key thing that a lot of managers make the mistake of when they're putting a change management plan together is they do the change management plan and they don't think of the people in the organization. So when you're changing something, you need to understand what other people are thinking, what are their ideas. Because remember, people in organizations fear change. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have empathy and understanding. There's some of the key characteristics of that transformational and also that democratic situation. Now, let's have a look at another situation. Maybe there's an emergency happening. Maybe there's been a bit of a crisis. What type of leadership would you use then? I mean, for me, if I was in that situation, I would use more of an autocratic style of leadership, someone who just makes a decision. Remember what I said, a lot of people think autocratic leaders are a negative thing, especially in a world where we're trying to build more democratic leaders, okay, within a flat organizational culture, something that will come on into a moment. But in actual fact, I think everyone needs to have good autocratic leadership styles because the autocratic leader is someone who makes the decision. If you're not autocratic in many different ways, your team will take advantage of you, they'll walk over you. So you need to be able to have that within your organizational structure and the way in which you develop the team. Now, let's also think of the teams. Some of you may have a practice where you have a team in the same building. Others will have multiple practices where you might be managing teams across the industry. Now, you've got to understand that in that style of leadership, you need to be able to demonstrate a little bit of transformational. You may need to have that bit of transcultural because remember that the cultures in the two different surgeries may be completely different at the end of the day. So the key thing that you have to understand is no one person is one style of leadership. And if you're going to be really good at leadership within the practice, you need to be able to understand when and how to use those. Now, within workbooks that you've been studying, we're also going to look at the strengths and weaknesses. So, if I just cast your mind back, transcultural leadership, some of the strengths, you know, write this down and brainstorm around it. You know, you could write some of the strengths being things like be able to understand the mindsets, the diversity, which is really important because that's what we're going to come on to in the next 2 weeks lesson. Other strengths are that it helps to grow your understanding of the team. The weakness is that you might diverge off track. You might go into too much about the team and forget the end goal. Now, when we look at transactional leadership, some of the strengths are that it's more organized, right? It's more KPI specific. Okay, it means that it's structured. You're working to targets, you're tracking and monitoring the performance. They're the good things, right? The weaknesses of this is that sometimes you may be more focused on those end goals and those targets, and you might forget the team, you know, the passion, the understanding of the team, the mindset of the team, and what their key skills and goals are. And when we look at a transformational leader, the key strengths of this one, again, write this down and brainstorm it. Key strengths could be things like it's about coaching, it's getting the best out of the team member, personal development and goals. The weaknesses are, well, it's like the opposite to your transactional leadership. You know, there's less scientific, there's less tracking. So you need to have that good balance of the two. And when we spoke about the other ones, the democratic leader, a democratic leader, the pros of this are that, again, you have an understanding of the team. You let the team have their say. You give them empowerment. The negative thing is if you're too democratic, the team could walk over you. They might not see you as that person authority, which is the opposite to laissez-faire and the opposite to autocratic leadership. Remember, with an autocratic leader, This is the person who is making the decisions by themselves. Now, the good thing is that you're quick to respond, okay? But the bad thing is that you're not democratic, okay? The team will see you as a person that doesn't listen and you lose the trust and transparency. So there's some of the key elements of that. Now, this session, as I mentioned, is a 30-minute session. So we're going to go over these key elements. And remember that I sent you previous videos linked to this before. Now, you've got leadership in an organization in your practice. We're also going to have the organizational culture in your practice. Now, you may be thinking, what is culture? We know culture as maybe the cultural background or identity of a person. Culture in an organization is how the organization works. It's the way the organizations may do things. Okay. And it could be different in every organization, from a profit to a non-profit. Each surgery or practice that you're working in could be completely different at the same time. Now, there's a really great model which I'm going to break down to you, which is called Charles Handy's Gods of Management. Now, in this model, Charles Handy says that every single culture, regardless of the organization, will fit into one of four sections. And these are going to be either a power culture, a role culture, a task culture, or a people culture. Now, I'm going to break these down because it's important to understand them. A power culture, like I've done with the drawing, you kind of often have one central power source at the very top, which feeds information straight down to everyone. It's like that person's in charge. You could say this is very autocratic in the leadership style, yeah? I mean, I've worked for this type of culture before where I had a director of a company. He was often, I was the middle manager here. He was often micromanaging my team, which was very negative at the same time. However, like I said, the key benefits of an autocratic manager, like a power based culture, is because there's only one person in command, if something goes wrong, the organization is very quick to respond to it. Now, you have a role based culture, and in the role based culture, every single person in the company has a key area which they're good at. It's like everyone works in their own pillar, their own silo. So you have, say, like customer service or sales or marketing. In a surgery, this might be the admin, the HR. Yeah, everyone has a key department. The pros of a culture like this is very organized. Okay, everyone knows their key jobs and duties. The negative parts of this is that, well, there's not much room for creativity to happen here. And very often in an organization where it's role based, people just get used to doing the same tasks over and over again, and they lose the projects and the creativity, which leads me nicely into a task based culture. Now, a task based culture is basically where people work on lots of different projects. So you might have Julie here who works in admin, Steve here in HR, and Helen here who's one of the practice managers. They may all do different things, but in a task-based culture, they can all connect to each other at any point, work on a different project. A great culture to have to build trust and transparency and empowerment. You know, a lot of large organizations outside of the healthcare are working like this now. They realize that by sticking people in these same silos and pillars, they're only going to ever work with the same people, and they're not going to know about other areas of the organization, which is why on this one, the departments could always move around and they could work to each other. A people-based culture is a little bit like that democratic leader. It's flat. And when I mean flat, a lot of people always say cultures in a business are hierarchy. You know, you have director, middle manager, lower manager, staff. Flat based culture, everyone's in the middle doing their own thing. You may think, oh my God, how does that work? A lot of startup companies work like this. Pros to it is everyone's empowered, right? Everyone feels like they are the leader in the organization. Negative points to this is there's not really a leader. If an emergency happened, if a bit of business risk happened, like financial insecurity, people wouldn't really know what to do. Personally, I think it's good to have a hybrid model. Like in most practices, you all have your key roles, right? However, I think at times it's good for you to move across to different pathways and develop different things, because by having a role-based culture, it's almost like a power culture, but in a less autocratic way, because you still have management and functions. However, at times, you can get each of these pillars to mingle and work with each other. And that creates that task based culture. It's like, here's Helen on reception. She just does the admin role. However, we could get her to work on this project with Peter from HR. Yeah. And by doing that, you're getting the team to work together to create more ideas. And what happens when these types of things happen is you create more innovation and you get higher productivity. Now, the good things about a positive organizational culture is that it's going to create things like higher innovation, higher productivity. They're the effects of a good organizational culture. A bad organizational culture, they're going to leave people feeling demotivated, run down. I mean, when you look at organizational culture, there are reasons to why your organizations function like this. You know, you may function very power based because that's what the key stakeholder wants. A stakeholder, by the way, if you want to write this down, is anyone who has an interest in the organization. So, stakeholders, for example, in the NHS, one key stakeholder of the NHS is the government because it's public funded. Other stakeholders are, your operations managers, the employees and the staff and the doctors. They're all stakeholders of the NHS. Also, your patients, okay, your customers. Yeah. So everyone is a stakeholder. The key thing that you have to remember is all the stakeholders want many different things. So you've got to try and please them all. You've got to try and please the government. You've got to try and please the council. You've got to try and please the patients, your employees. Stakeholders will have a big impact in the way your organization is functioned. Also, things like costs and budgets. However, we all face a lot of problems in terms of budgets and various things like that, which is why, even though we're doing this, it's good to hybrid and move on to this because we've got to make our operations more efficient. Now, there's a great, 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 great company which I want you to go and research. Okay, it's not healthcare. It's a company called Atlassian. They're an Australian software company. And I want you to look at their ship it days. Okay, Atlassian ship it day. Google it. They do this amazing thing where they send their team off at the end of a quarter to go and work on an idea. The team goes away, they come back, they pitch it. When the team goes away, you could have the director working with the janitor, with the intern. What that's doing, it's creating innovation and ideas and productivity. Now, I know you can't send people away for 40 hours in your practices, it's not practical, but you could still implement team building days. What they successfully did with this was they're creating more of this task-based culture. They're getting people to work together who traditionally wouldn't do. And that's just creating more efficiency. So when you're leading people, it's important not just to look at your leadership styles, but to also look at the culture that you're creating. Now, just think right now, what is your culture like in the practice where you're working? Is it innovative? Is it efficient? Could it be changed? Do you think it's a role-based culture? Do you think it's a task-based culture? How can you change it? That's important to note. Remember, when you change things, the leadership styles I told you about, democratic, transformational, you should always bear in mind the humans at the end of the day. And a lot of managers don't do that. They just change things because they say, okay, this is the policy that the highest stakeholders in the organization have done. This is what we have to do. Well, that doesn't think about the person in the organization. You have to be more democratic, be more transformational. And with that, try and make these little bits of task cultures happening. Get people to work together. Because remember, people think differently. That's the power of that transcultural leadership, which we mentioned, and something which you can bring into the organization. But remember that you've got to think practically when you look at the organizational culture and how you're going to change it. Bearing in mind things like the time that you have with the team, the budgets, the costs, what will the other stakeholders say? It's important to make sure you get the team together, to have things like town hall style meetings as opposed to standard team meetings. If you've never heard of a town hall style meeting before, it's very often where the team get an input into the meeting as much as the person leading it. Do some research in that, because you may want to embed more of this style of leadership to help grow your organization a lot more. And that really looks at our leadership styles and how we're going to operate within the organizational culture. Now, I'm very keen to keep these sessions under 30 minutes. So we've gone through quite a lot of things tonight. Just to look back at the objectives of this session, we were to look at leadership styles. We covered some of the weaknesses of the different leadership styles. We looked at the suitability of the leadership styles depending on the situation. We also looked at examples of how you can identify your organizational culture and what impacts the organizational culture, things like cost, budget, stakeholders, and the effects of an organizational culture. Well, if it goes well, it creates innovation, efficiency, productivity. Remember to research Atlassian and see how you can implement that into practice, into your practice, because that's key. We need to be not just looking at what you're currently doing, but taking ideas from external businesses and transferring those skills into your surgeries. So what's going to happen is, like I said, apologies if you were on the original link which I'd sent out. There was an issue. We've had to reuse this link. I'm going to resend it out to everyone because it is recording at the same time. We're going to have a class like this every 2 weeks. So I'll be sending you links to the next one. The next one won't be live. It'll be a pre-recorded session because I am away on a work trip. But don't forget, throughout all the time, I'm always there via email, WhatsApp, and then we also have our next meetings already booked in. So thank you for tuning in tonight, and I hope you've got enough information to help you get through some more sections in those workbooks.